everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour, a meeting place that encourages photographers to connect, inspire, and create. My guests share tips, techniques, the stories behind their photographs, and inspire us to look at a subject a little differently. The schedule for upcoming presentations is on my website at lindanickell.com. And if you haven't subscribed to the Happiness Hour YouTube channel, please check it out for sessions that you may have missed. Tonight's guest is Andrew Peschong. Andrew is a South Dakota-based landscape and travel photographer. This year alone, Andrew has traveled to Alaska, Botswana, and the Faroe Islands. Andrew's going to share his insight on how you can maximize or maybe even minimize the gear that will help you have a great trip. If you're on Instagram, you can find him at evermor.photography, and you can connect with him through his website, evermor.online. In tonight's presentation, Travel Photography Unveiled, Gear, Bags, and Global Wonders. Andrew will talk about the secrets of packing for unforgettable photographic journeys, how to select the right photography gear without overburdening yourself, choose the perfect backpack size for airline travel, and master clothing and weather considerations for diverse destinations. Welcome to the Happiness Hour, Andrew.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen here.
Well, wait a minute. Say hello, Linda. It's nice to see you.
Hello, Linda. It's nice to see you. That was a wonderful introduction. I'm very honored. And you didn't miss anything either. I'm very impressed.
Oh yeah, I don't. Okay, yeah. So, all
Mhm.
right. I always I think most people were in the room when we started, but I like to own up to if I know the speaker or where I get
Sure.
them from. Sometimes it's just a blind toss, and maybe somebody will catch it and throw it back at me. But you, my friend, were trapped with me for what, 6 days, 7 days? And I met you because we were invited to join Elise Bender on her scouting trip to
Hmm.
the Faroe Islands. And I didn't know anybody on this trip. And just a couple of weeks ago, I had James Kelly, just James K, come and do his presentation. And it was your turn to come up. So I am thrilled. It was a great trip for me because I came back with 4 people willing to do presentations for the group. So yay me. So
Yeah, you
that's
didn't have to work too hard for that.
no, I really didn't. It's like, hey, you want to do this? Yes, yes, please. So I am very grateful that you did say yes, because I didn't have to like work extra hard to break your spirit.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, my background is kind of in public speaking. I mean, I coached, Toastmasters and
Yep.
managed the Central US division for a few years. So it's just a muscle you need to get back into. And I love doing presentations. My background is like teaching people, and I love to coach people. So I thought this would be a perfect opportunity.
Well, I appreciate it. Now, with that, you may share your screen. Oh, well, you said I didn't skip anything in your bio. I was going to give you the opportunity to add if I did, if there's something that you really wanted to disclose or share, take that opportunity. But otherwise, you can start your presentation.
Cool. Yeah, I think we're good. I'll mention that Evermore is Evermor. There's no E on the end.
Yep.
So when you're typing that into your computer and online, I think autocorrect will sometimes throw an E on the
Yes,
end. So
yes.
yeah, look out for that. That gets people every once in a while.
And
All right.
I'll link that to the show notes below so people can just hit a link and get to you.
Okay, perfect. So you should be sharing or seeing my screen right now. Can you see that, Linda?
Perfectly.
Great. Okay. So I want to welcome everybody for coming out tonight. We're going to talk about gear bags and global wonders. So I learned a lot traveling kind of around the world this past year, and hopefully I can teach you some lessons. That way you get at least a little tips and tricks, and don't make some of the mistakes that I did. But first we need to start out with, who is this guy? give you a little bit of background on me. So this first sentence and paragraph is a snippet off my website. If you head over to evermor.online, you can see that. Basically, I just want to start a two-way conversation with the viewer. So I want you to look at pictures and really like feel them. I want them to challenge your emotions. I want you to not just look at it and say, hey, that's a pretty scene. I want you to kind of like digest it and work with it a little bit. I think the best photographs are ones that you can look at and work through and not just flip through. We're in such a social media world that it's just seconds here and there. So I want you to kind of sit on mine for a little bit. So a little bit of my background is I was born in California, born in Bakersfield, and then moved out to South Dakota when I was 4. My dad's a hydrogeologist, so he deals a lot with groundwater and was out there for oil. I went to Brandon Valley High School 2006, graduated with a bachelor's in computer science. My background is in computer science. I'm a tech guy, like I've literally written programming languages and ran a computer company out of Madison, South Dakota for a few years, built many computers. And then, kind of like I alluded to on the beginning of the presentation, I did a lot of volunteer work with Toastmasters. If you're not familiar with Toastmasters, it's essentially a leadership group that's international. So I joined maybe 10, 12 years ago, worked my way up to club president, did that for 5 or 6 years, and then moved into area director. So I oversaw Sioux Falls as 2 areas. That's about 250,000 people for a metropolitan area. It was about 30, 40 clubs, and then moved up into a division director. So that was Eastern South Dakota, and then eventually the entire kind of central Midwest, managing those clubs. So I would give presentations for, 300 professional speakers and kind of walk them through here's what you should do and kind of all that stuff. So it was kind of fun. And that paired well with my medical background, which I do ski patrol. I'm an outdoor emergency care instructor trainer. So I train our trainers. It's equivalent to an EMT basic. It's actually a little bit more involved. We get a lot of EMTs that go through our course and say it's actually more challenging than the national NREMT. And then I have a strong background in search and rescue, got certified to lead those missions and set all those up last year as well. So basically, I enjoy doing everything outdoors. I wrote our ski instructor curriculum out here. We do have a ski hill. It's not big, but we got one. And if you come out here and go skiing, you'll go through my curriculum. So you can see that I love teaching people things and really getting outdoors. Um, the thing that everybody jumps on its list is the ordained minister bit. In 2019, my sister got married. She's 6 years younger than me, and wedding coming up. And I said, Emma, I'm looking for something to do with the wedding. And she says, well, we would love to have you marry us. And with my public speaking background, I thought that was perfect. So I got ordained and married my sister in front of, I should really rephrase that better, was the officiant for my sister's wedding in front of about 200 people and did that and word got around. I really enjoyed it. So I've been doing that ever since and have done probably about a dozen weddings since then. I write the script specifically for the couple between like a little religious, lot religious, kind of how long they're looking for. It's really fun. And then I've worked a lot with United Way. United Way, you may have heard of. It's a nationwide organization, nonprofit that you essentially donate to, and then they divvy out the money to a whole bunch of other smaller nonprofits. I'm on the board for our Lunches Served and then our Camera Club as well. And then I also work at Citibank, did that for 10 or 11 years, and then moved to MarketBeat, which is the largest digital media advertiser in the Dakotas, all with 15 people. We were on a very small crew and get a lot done. The picture on the left is me flying an extra 330 stunt plane. If you've heard of the Red Bull air races, that's the same plane they use. They use the single cockpit version. Obviously, you can see my instructor giving his hand up in the back. And as I fly us around. So I did that down in Vegas. That was super fun. So flew that for about 45 minutes. This was me in the middle of a corkscrew, did stalls, hammerheads, take the plane straight up, vertical, cut the engine, flip it over so you're looking straight down at the ground, turn the engine back on, throttle down, and then pull out of it. So a little bit of an adrenaline junkie too. All right, what you're here about. So my photography background. I didn't just wake up and start taking photos, but I primarily shoot landscape, beginning into wildlife, and I do a lot of sessions too. I shoot Sony. I used to shoot a Nikon D3200 for a little bit and went over to Sony full frame mirrorless. Initially started with a Sony A7R3, which was a great little camera, and then switched to an A7R4, which I love. And then my primary rig is a Sony A1. So I've been really happy with that. Hopefully we got some Sony people in here. I know when I did my presentation at the Camera Club, nobody shot Sony. It was all Nikon and Canon. But I think Sony's kind of been leading the way for full frame and mirrorless especially. So I've been really happy with that. Been using PC for 30 years, made the transition to Mac. Excuse me, last year. Couldn't be happier. I use a Wacom tablet to edit my photos, and the Wacom just simply works better, in my opinion. With the Mac, everything just works. It's faster. Was used to having to get like a really heavy duty laptop to manage all the processing I wanted to do with my photos. And it was just a tank, and the battery didn't last very long. And I switched to a MacBook Pro M2, and it just picked right up on it. Everything was great, super fast, battery lasts forever. And I'm like, well, what more can you want? So I fully made the transition. If you have any questions with that or like are thinking about it yourself, definitely let me know, because I never thought I would say that ever. I'm like, no, I'm not going with Mac. Like, this is not happening. Don't even think about it. And here we are. I'm looking into a Mac Pro and couldn't be happier. So I'm just as surprised as you are. Kind of like we talked before, my principles, this is all personal. That's the kind of the best part about photography, is that everything is what you want to do. So there's no right, there's no wrong. It's everything is wonderful as long as you're having fun. That's what matters. So a few principles that are really important to me are I want to have that two-way conversation with the viewer. I want photos to evoke emotion. You should look at a photo and feel engaged somehow. In my opinion, if I didn't do that, then I failed, and the photograph probably shouldn't see the light of day. I also love to have something to say. I want a statement piece. I want people to walk into the room and go, oh my God, look at that. That's incredible, and sit with it for a little bit. And naturally, you can probably guess that I think photography is more art versus documentary. That's just my opinion. A lot of the creative decisions I make, I want to preserve the natural aspect of the scene, but I also want to evoke emotion into it. And to evoke emotion into it, sometimes you can't literally represent the scene in all regards. You want to introduce some colors, you want to, diminish other colors, you want to have a little bit of creative freedom with that. As Lynn said, I make that first trip to Alaska, which we'll get into in a minute, just a little background. And then went to Botswana after that, which was a complete disaster getting there. I'll tell you about that. And had a much smoother trip lately to the Faroe Islands and Iceland. To walk through a couple photos on the left, that top left photo is the first kind of major print I sold. That was maybe 6 months after I got into photography. That's a 32 by 48, three of them lined up side by side. That shot is of Falls Park. It's like the #1 park in Sioux Falls, probably in eastern South Dakota. It's right in the middle of Sioux Falls. It's our city's namesake, naturally. And I'm kind of good at looking at a scene and getting unique representations of it, kind of looking at it differently. So I was able to come up with that. Got really into long exposure when I started photography. So everything was 30 seconds. Everything was a minute, 10 stops, 6 stop, you name it. And that was one of the first ones. Everybody loved it. It was instantly recognizable. And that's still kind of one of my top sellers. So I was super happy with that and was absolutely over the moon. The right photo is from the Faroe Islands. I think Linda might have actually took that. Middle left photo is deep in Denali National Park. Another Faroe Islands picture on the right there. Lower left photo is from Botswana in the middle of the day. I'm not old, I'm just tired. You're getting up before sunrise every day and getting out to see the animals, and you take a break during the day and it's nice and hot. How can you not take a nap? And then the lower right photo is in the middle of nowhere in Alaska. To be more specific, that is outside of Crescent Lake. We're had just landed on a float plane, and we're looking for bears on the ground there. Did not see any. Weather got super sketchy, and we were lucky to get out of there, to be honest with you. So a little bit of my background, more creative driven, shoot Sony, made the transition to Mac, and I want to evoke emotion. I want to make a statement. So I did not just wake up and start taking photos. I grew up in a photography family. My dad has shot for years. He shoots Nikon kind of here and there. He doesn't have a business, just does it because he enjoys it. And I was tagged along and had a good time, but never really, you know, took a couple shots here and there, but didn't really know what I was doing. And to be honest with you, didn't really care a whole lot either. I was just out there to enjoy nature and have fun and maybe take a couple of photos along the way. So that photo on the left, I just moved into a new place, and this is the southern end of Sioux Falls. Two interstates kind of come together where the city ends right there. And it was a beautiful night. Sunset was going down. I'm like, man, that's just gorgeous. I should go take a picture of that. So I ran out there to an overpass and had no idea what I was doing. And, dropped the f-stop down to like F22 or F26 or something. Didn't have any filters or anything like that. It's just way before that. And just started taking photos. And I think that's like a 20-second exposure I was able to squeak out there. Didn't know what I was doing with Lightroom, imported it, updated a couple things here and there. And in South Dakota, we have it's a huge banking state. So there's the South Dakota Bankers Calendar that is released every year, and everybody at Citibank, where I was working at the time, gets its calendar. So I'm like, hey, I should submit it to the calendar. So I did, and it got selected, which is kind of a big deal because not a lot of photos get selected into that, and it just absolutely blew my mind. So fast forward to the calendar coming out and everybody at Citibank getting one, 500 people in the building, and that was a low number. I'm walking around Citibank and everybody's like, Andrew, I didn't know you're a photographer. I'm kind of laughing. So I'm like, well, I didn't know either. So that kind of planted the seed in my mind to say like, hey, maybe you should consider this more in the future. And if you look at the years, you can tell some time went by, right? So 5-ish years went by, and it kind of clicked that, yeah, I'm looking for something to do. I got a little bit more time now, so I should really get into photography because I think that's super fun. And in my opinion, the best thing you can do is double down on yourself. You should follow and find your curiosities and just go after them. If you're good at something, you should pursue it as, just get after it as much as you possibly can. So I got really into photography right at 2020. And like I mentioned before, that's obviously a long exposure shot. So I took that at Falls Park. That's a little bit to the left of that first image you saw. And you can kind of see the Sister Falls on the right, and then the main falls on the left there. And was super happy with them. I'm like, wow, this is incredible. You can put 30 seconds of an image into one, 30 seconds of time into one, kind of show that time lapse. And had the greatest time ever. Absolutely loved it and really dove into it. But as you can see, kind of looking at that photo, really took things too far, really kind of artsy in that regard, and knew that my post processing probably need a little bit of work to match some of the creative ideas I had. So roll around a little bit later to 2020. The picture on the right is at Palisades, which is one of our state parks here, kind of uninspected in my opinion, just imagine a bunch of cornfields and then river cutting through, and bam, here's a bunch of pink quartzite cliffs. So I took this photo one night, and it's a little bit of a long exposure. It's a stacked image, so that's why you can get that the nice starburst on there and see that full depth and dimension of King Rock. That's the big rock on the right next to it. So I did a lot of bracketing. I would typically bracket one or two steps apart and then take 5 shots on either side because I wanted to really get that full image. And edited this one in Lightroom. You can see a typical filter kind of going across the middle there, a little bit darker. If you look on that rock on the left, right at the I'm right at the edge. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's like right on the left there. You can see the top of that rock on the left is a little bit darker. So I was doing all my editing in Lightroom at the time, and I like this image because it was more of a natural take on it, but it still showed that creative side I was looking for. And I thought, hey, this is what I want to go for. This is kind of what I'm looking for. So I need to be able to replicate this. So that's exactly what I did. Is I went out and found all of the tutorials I could, dove head over heels into, Nick Page's Lightroom tutorials, Greg Benz's Luminar tutorials, and Chris Orwood's tutorials. Literally found anything I could, purchased it, met with all sorts of people, talked with them, super off script, like, hey, what do you actually do in the field? Can we talk about this? And learned as much as I possibly could. So we're talking easily hundreds of hours of training in Photoshop specifically. Got really away from Lightroom, switched to Lightroom as a pure digital asset manager, a DAM, as it's really designed for and what it was built for. They're adding some editing capabilities now just because everybody's using it and like we might as well put some editing capabilities in there. But do a lot of photo prep in Lightroom, and then the real work happens in Photoshop, in my opinion, where it should, if you want to invest that time and follow those creative desires. So you can see the big differences between the shot on the left in Alaska for 2022 and the shot on the right here from Palisades in 2020. So if you look at the shot from 2020, you can see that it's kind of flat, right? We the rocks are kind of flat. There's not a lot of dodging and burning. There's a little vignetting around the outside. And then there's that filter kind of going across the top half of the image, which is actually just a reverse gradient neutral density filter across the top there. And not much really going on with that in the processing sense. So comparing that to this image on the left here from Alaska is hopefully quite different. So if you look at the mountains, you can see a lot of luminosity masks, a lot of dodging and burning on those luminosity masks, like burning on the L1 only and, dodging on the D3 only to really bring out those dimensions in the rock and follow that creative vision that I had for it. Because at the end of the day, that's really what we're looking for is what's in your head and does it match what you're outputting? And if it doesn't, why doesn't it? So you should always be happy with your work. And I was essentially trying to catch up, excuse me, with myself in that regard. I had this vision in my head and I knew that I couldn't go to Alaska and release images from Alaska that would match what I thought they should be. So that's why I really invested a whole ton of time and energy into that. You can see that in the middle bear shot. This was Austin Crescent Lake. This bear was about 20 feet away from us in an open John boat. And then kind of taking a little bit further to the right, this picture of Falls Park. Has a lot more depth and dimension and, in my opinion, taste than some of those first very popular shots. It's been a journey. Big difference between the image on the left here of the sunset and the image on the right here of Falls Park. That really happened in the course of 2 years. If I see something, I want to chase it and learn and get after it. I don't really tend to waste a lot of time with it. So the point of those earlier slides was to more or less say that it's a learning experience to just wake up and start taking photos. We all start somewhere. You look at some of the huge photographers now and you're like, oh my God, these shots are incredible. How did they get there? Keep in mind that that was not an overnight thing. Overnight successes are not overnight. They're years and years of slogging and hard work and hours upon hours upon hours of labor, and you're essentially creating luck, and then one night it just happens. So it's like boiling a pot of water, the prior degrees, quote unquote, don't matter until they do because they get you there to the boiling point. So we're here today to talk about travel photography, one bag or two. So you basically need to ask yourself, do you want convenience or flexibility? If you're going to take one bag, I'm an Atlas Packs ambassador. So all the packs I recommend are going to be Atlas Packs. I really love Atlas Packs because I come from a mountaineering and backpacking background, and Atlas Packs are built like that. What do I mean by that? When you're carrying weight, it should be distributed on your hips. That's how our bodies were designed to carry weight. If you're carrying weight on your shoulders, then you're going to have a bad time. That's why your shoulders hurt. That's why you're hunched over, which makes it worse. And you're just making your life bad on purpose, more or less. So we want to make that weight right on your hips where it should be. Look at any backpacking pack. That's where the weight goes. Atlas Packs shows that. If you take one bag, you're going to be looking at the one on the left. It's black pack. That's a 60-liter bag that it spans up to about 80. In the backpacking world, that would be equivalent to like a weekend pack to a light week pack. And the breakdown of that pack is in the lower left image. You can see those blue dividers, and that's what your one pack is going to look like. You can take the frame out and actually use that as a carry-on. I did. It's a big carry-on, but it will fit, but it's heavy. That being said, you're not going to forget it, and your life is simple. Or, big or, you can carry two packs. You can carry one as your carry-on and one as your personal item. So for those, we'd be looking at the pack on the right, that neon green pack. That's me and Elise there. And that pack is, I think, 30 to 40 liters, and it spans up to 60-ish. In the backpacking world, that would be like an overnight pack, kind of like a big day pack, if you want to think of it like that. Pack that you grab off the shelf can be about that size, maybe a little bit bigger. So you're going to use that pack as your personal item because you can compress it down to the size of a personal item. And then you're going to carry something like a roller bag with your camera gear in it. And if we look down in the center, you can see my Pelican with the clear hard dividers there and all those little red tabs. That's where my camera gear goes. So it moves from my back in that big pack down to a Pelican roller. Downsides of that being I was terrified all the trips that I was going to forget one bag. I got one under the seat and one overhead. So I had reminders in my phone, do not forget your bag, leaving the plane. You know how hard it is to get back on a plane. Big positives being it's a lot easier on your back. You can obviously still put that weight on your hips with the hip belt, but if you've removed the frame to make it carry-on legal or personal item legal, then that weight is not really going to want to sit on your hips. It's just going to kind of be a morph on your back, and it's going to be a little bit tougher. So that being said, I do prefer two packs just because it seems a little bit easier to manage. It's not like you're carrying around one giant pack, but it's up to you. A lot of people don't have a rolling Pelican case, and you'd have to go buy one, and they're not free. They're in fact very far from free, and that's just more investment. So keep that in mind. We're going to talk a little bit about that right now. The first thing you need to determine is what gear are you bringing on the trip and what are you really going to shoot? So before you think about that, you need to think about any carry limitations you might have. If you have a bad back, if your doctor says you can't lift a certain number of weight, if you have a hard time pulling bags out of overheads, especially heavy bags out of overheads, you need to identify those right off the bat because they're going to heavily influence your decisions from this point on. And you can't you work around them, but they're hard limitations. So get those right out there and then work with those, not against them. So once you've identified your limitations, if you have any or anything you're thinking about with that, even if it's not like officially defined, then you can think about required gear. So this would be my Sony A1, the primary, and definitely the A7R4 as a backup. If I'm out in the field and my A1 were to go down, hasn't yet. You can hear me knocking on some wood there. if that went down, I couldn't shoot anything, then why am I there? I just went to the Faroe Islands for nothing. I traveled days and detoured through Germany to get to Botswana for nothing. So think about what you really need. And you can even think about memory cards and some batteries and a little bit of lenses with that. So required gear in that sense would be, what are you going to shoot? What are your intended subjects? Are you shooting primarily wildlife? So you want more of a telephoto lens. Therefore, I would really take my Sony 200 to 600. I would call that required gear. I can't get too much. If I took a 12 to 24 instead of that, or my 24 to 70 instead of that, it's not going to work for me. That's going to be a failure on my part. So think about what you're going to shoot and what lenses you currently have you will need to bring to shoot that. Don't bring all your lenses. We're just talking, hey, I'm shooting wildlife or landscape, and I definitely need this lens or that lens for that. So think about that. You've got your camera at this point, memory cards, a couple batteries, and maybe a lens or two. And think about what extra opportunities you might have. So in this case, I was in Botswana and I thought, hey, I'm going to be primarily shooting wildlife and definitely use that Sony to 200 to 600 camo one, clearly in the lower left there. But I'm also going to be shooting some landscapes. That's also why I'm there. So I should bring like a 28 to 200 Tamron. So that's going to cover that full range from 28 to 200 with the Tamron, and then complement that with a 200 to 600 with the Sony. So in that regard, I'm really going 28 to 600. Boom. Definitely call that required gear. Cover all those extra opportunities. And then I also brought my Sony 12 to 24 2.8 GM and 28 to 70 2.8 GM, just because I knew I might do some lights night sky photography as well. And I've got the room for it. So those extra opportunities, that 2.8 f-stop would really be great for that. At this point, you've thought about what kind of stuff can I fit in there? What kind of limitations do I have? What am I definitely going to shoot? What lenses am I going to have to bring for that? So you should have a good baseline of gear. You should feel pretty confident at this point that you've at least got what you need. And maybe a couple of opportunities will pop up here and there, and you can probably make do. I mean, maybe if you'll notice that I mentioned that Sony 200 to 600 is a variable aperture. It's 5.6 to 6.3 on the top end, and that's not a flat 400 prime with a 3.5 f stop, or like their other 600 GM, which is like a 4.5 f stop. And I knew that. I knew those lenses were huge and they're very fun and they're great, but I didn't need that. I didn't need that f-stop. I didn't need that wide openness, at least the majority of the time. We're going to be shooting kind of in the morning and at night, but I can get by with that variable zoom. So that brings me to edge cases, shiny objects. I know when you're going on a trip or you're going on like a race day, maybe you're training for a marathon, you want to try the new goo. You want to try the new thing. You're going on a trip. Why not have all the fun and do all the things? And, why stop there? So maybe you're thinking about renting that 400 prime or that 600 prime or whatever it is that you're shooting. I want you to pause and really consider if you're going to use it a whole lot, because it's going to be a lot of money to bring it along. It's going to be big and bulky. We know that bags don't always get treated great. And if you're thinking about bringing prime lenses, I mean, that's great, but what if you're too zoomed in for some subject? I did a lot of research before I went to Botswana and found that the top photographers out there specifically shoot variable zoom lenses because you have to be able to keep up with the wildlife. If something happens in front of you and you've got your 600 prime or your 400 prime and it's not the right focal length, well, too bad. If you've got your second body right there, even just grabbing that to pull it up and shoot, you're probably going to be too late. So that's why I made the decision to go with the 200 to 600 variable zoom and deal with the f-stop disadvantage, because in my opinion, it was much better to get the shot, even if it might have a little bit more noise, than completely miss the shot. I think you should get the shot no matter what, and you can deal with your issues in post. But if you don't get the shot, then there's nothing to edit in post, and you just flat out don't have it. So that's for a good reason why I kind of shy away from, those shiny objects, those edge cases that sure would be fun to bring, but maybe you shouldn't bring them. All right, we talked about a lot of gear, and I definitely want to bring up clothing and weather. We're going to do a quick overview, just half an hour on this. We're going to keep it moving. I'm going to give you a quick overview of layering. If you're not familiar with layering, obviously this is for like temps 50 degrees and below-ish. Anything above that, we're not doing any layering. So you basically have your base layer, your mid-weight layer, and then your outside shell layer. Your base layer's job is to keep you dry and be breathable. It pulls the moisture off of your skin. If you get wet or sweaty in the cold, you get hypothermic very quickly. Your risk goes up exponentially right away. So you definitely don't want to get wet when you're in the cold. Your base layer's job is to pull off that moisture and transfer it to your outer layers, essentially. So your base layer pulls off the moisture, is breathable, and then your insulating mid layer comes along and keeps you warm. That's really all it does. Is it just keeps you warm and is breathable, and it does not offer any protection from the elements. That's why it's soft. That's why it's fluffy. That's why it's comfortable. Its job is to keep you warm and not protect you from the elements. If it gets wet, that's probably not great, and it just is there to keep you warm. So then your hard shell outside outer layer comes along, and that offers no insulation, but it completely protects you from the elements. So you can see how those two complement each other. The outside is a shell that doesn't insulate you at all, but completely protects you. And your mid layer insulates you fully, but does not protect you. They work together to offer you that complete package. So that's why you want to have those three. And as with anything, you want to consider how much you're actually going to use it. If you're just going to go on one trip and you don't live in a cold weather climate, don't go out and buy the latest thing, because you're probably not going to need it. You're probably not going to use it past the trip. But if you live in a cold weather climate and your life literally depends on your gear, then obviously you're going to want to purchase the best gear that you can afford for that reason. And then consider how it's going to fit into your bag. So you can see my bag in the middle there. I use a Patagonia 100-liter rolling black hole bag. I think that's the biggest pack they make, and it's rolling because who would want to carry that? The guy on the right, that bag is filled with air. I would never do that. If you put 100 liters of anything in there, it's going to be kind of heavy. So think about where you're going and how your clothing is going to fit and come along with you. If there's any advice I would offer to you right now, if you can buy quality gear that can do a couple of jobs, then that's less gear you have to bring and less heartache you'll have down the road. You've probably seen a lot of jackets that are a hard shell and an insulating layer in one. You can get a shell that's insulated with down goose, and that's great. And those are wonderful until they're not. They're great for a specific purpose, but they're typically pretty warm. And if you're out in the field and you're getting warm and about to sweat, well, you can't separate those. They're in one. So kind of a tough luck, should have thought of that ahead of time kind of deal. I mean, that might be a great jacket for kicking around town, going in and out of your car, and you want a hard shell to protect you from the weather, but you also want some insulation when you're sitting in your car, maybe waiting for it to warm up. Perfect. You're probably not going to be sweating a whole lot, so you're not going to have to worry about unzipping it or losing some of that heat, and it's not going to be a big deal. But when you're out in the field and you're working with a pack on your back and you're starting to sweat and you can't take off the jacket because it's snowing, but your jacket's too hot, well, it sure would have been nice to have a couple of jackets, wouldn't it? we have some international travel considerations. So, is it going to take time to go to and from customs? When I went to Botswana, I was originally going to fly there directly from Chicago to Newark, New Jersey, and then take that from Newark, New Jersey, straight to Johannesburg, South Africa. But that did not happen for later reasons and had to detour through Frankfurt, Germany, and spend a solid day there and really set me behind. So think about time leaving and coming through customs. It's probably going to be highly dependent on your day and the timing with that. Think about what kind of plane sizes you're going to be riding in. I know when we go to Alaska, we fly in a lot of puddle jumpers, and their limitations are completely different than the giant Airbus that I got to Alaska in. So think about if you're going to be flying in an Airbus, a puddle jumper, or you can see that private plane that I'm getting out of there, which you can pretty much do whatever you want. So think about that, and especially what kind of international travel carry-on requirements you might have. I mentioned that Pelican case that I bought. I specifically bought that case because it was small enough where it would be completely legal with any international travel. The last thing I wanted to do was get somewhere and figure out that my carry-on was too big. That was a worst case scenario in my book, and I wanted to avoid that at all costs. So I planned ahead and bought a bag that would allow me to avoid that. And then think about your language and vaccines. When I went to Germany, a lot of places in the world speak English, but not all. And kind of once you especially get outside of the major cities, well, do you have somebody there with you that can translate for you, that can talk to the locals and get you where you need to go? When I went to Frankfurt, Germany, which is one of the most highly trafficked cities in the world, especially for international travel, and English is highly spoken there, I had to buy a lot of camera gear because my carry-on was not going to make it, and I was going to spend 2.5 weeks in the bush with no carry-on, or sorry, with no checked luggage. So I literally had everything on my back, and that was it, period. So when I was in Frankfurt, I knew I had to buy all the clothes I could and all the camera gear I could because I left my chargers in my checked luggage and I was not going to have any battery chargers. And that was a critical item in my book. So I had to go to Frankfurt and buy hard and soft gear, and the camera shop didn't speak a lot of English. So I was lucky to have somebody there with me that could walk me through and get me the gear I need. So think about kind of what limitations you might encounter with language vaccines and kind of where you're going to be. All right, we're moving on to the kind of the end of the presentation here. We'll talk about the Faroe Islands and then Botswana. The Faroe Islands was the latest trip I went on. That was a lot simpler. We'll start out with that. I used 2 bags for that because I didn't want to lug around that large camera bag, and I was okay with accepting the responsibility of making sure to grab my bag every time and enjoy a little bit more freedom of just kind of moving around. And I thought it was a little bit easier to carry 2 bags instead of one. When I got to my destination, I took everything out of my Pelican case and put it in that backpack I was wearing and more or less just kind of transferred over them. I got to the Faroe Islands by flying from Sioux Falls to Chicago, and then Chicago is an international airport. Took a direct flight from Chicago to Iceland, Reykjavik. You can see it in the top left of the screen there. That's Iceland, and the one point on that map is Reykjavik. And then took a plane from Reykjavik, had a day in Reykjavik, and then flew to the Faroe Islands and kind of met everybody there. That was a lot simpler. Right now, they're offering direct flights to the Faroe Islands, which is super cool, from New York City, JFK, and maybe LaGuardia. Check on that. But that's coming up here, so it's going to open it up a lot. I think the Faroe Islands have realized how much tourism can be great. That being said, it's a very small area. It's a whole bunch of little tiny islands all together, and it's nearly impossible to get citizenship there, as James would probably tell you. It's a really neat area, but you definitely want to plan ahead and hire local guides with that. We saw a lot of puffins when we were there. They shot in the middle here. If you look at some photos from our group, we were very fortunate to take this one. We were maybe 20 feet away from this guy, just sitting by his burrow there. And then I included the photo on the top right. You need shooting in the digital age. There's really no downside to taking photos. I remember growing up with my dad always said, "Well, hey, every time you press the shutter, it'd be like a nickel, right? Because you need to process the film and do all that stuff." But now with my A1, you shoot 30 frames a second. You can just kind of, if you've got the storage, then you might as well go for it. So this photo on the top right, I didn't think was going to happen at all. We were tracking puffins coming into land in their burrows. They were sitting out in the ocean, kind of waiting for their food to digest so they could be light enough to fly up there into their burrows and come home for the night. So this guy was coming left to right, obviously across the frame. And I shot this through a bunch of brush. I didn't think the tracking was going to be able to handle it, especially through the brush, but it had already locked onto it. And it ended up being one of my favorite shots because it was taken right at dusk through the brush, added a lot of color to the scene. I really love that deep blue in the top left, and then that kind of fiery uh, brush and the right. And yeah, I included that to just say, hey, you should shoot and try to get the shots that you might not think you'll get. If anything, they'll work out, and they might be your favorite photo of the trip. Like I talked about before, you want to consider what you're going to be shooting. So when I went to the Faroe Islands and selected my lenses for that, I knew I'd be doing at least a little bit of long exposure, but probably not a whole lot. So I brought a 3-stop and a sit-stop neutral density filter, just flat, not graduated, because I knew I could handle most scenes with that and combine them to be a 9-ish 10-stop if I needed to. And then I knew I was going to be shooting a lot of wildlife. So I definitely wanted to bring that Sony 200 to 600 and complement that with the Tamron 28 to 200 to cover that full range. Because if I wasn't able to get that wildlife, then again, like why are we there? I was able to get a few long exposure shots about the amount that I thought I was going to get, but the focus of the trip was really wildlife, and we knew that going into it. At this point, you also kind of want to consider what brand of lenses you're shooting. When I got into the Sony world, there wasn't a lot of Tamron lenses available, and I knew that. So a lot of my lenses are Sony's. I mean, I use the 12 to 24, the 24 to 70, the 100 to 400, the 200 to 600. And those seem like long ranges, but they're not really. They're fast lenses, which is awesome. But you compare that with like a Tamron 50 to, 300, I think they have now, or like a Tamron like 150 to 600. That's a much wider focal range, but there's always trade-offs with anything. You're going to lose a lot of that f-stops. It's going to be a lot slower of a lens, and you should think about, do I really want that fast, wide open f-stop at the expense of a shorter focal length? Or do I need the range with like maybe a Tamron lens, like that 28 to 200 that I mentioned, at the expense of not being able to maybe get the f-stop you want in the early morning or late night? There's a couple more images from the trip. I'll quickly walk through these. I don't want to spend too much time on that. We're coming up on 45 minutes here. The image on the left was maybe like 5 feet away from this guy. You're sitting on the edge of a cliff and just kind of walked up and sat down with him. Beautiful blue images in the middle is from Reykjavik, Iceland, outside the Blue Lagoon, some volcanic pools that you can go check out. Very cool. If you want sheep, go to the Faroe Islands. That's one of their major exports is sheep. Got some cool sheepskin from there. Top right is your typical weather you'll see in the Faroe Islands. This is a little more exaggerated. It's typically 40s and 50s and rainy and kind of cloudy and windy. The sun does punch through. I made the observation that the sun doesn't punch through as much in the Faroe Islands as it does in Alaska. In my opinion, that's because the Faroe Islands are a lot more windy and the sun just doesn't have the time to punch through. Or Alaska has a lot lower wind and the sun can kind of take its time punching through with the clouds. We have an Arctic tern in the lower center. If you look really closely, you can see he's got some food in his mouth. And then lower center is coming back to camp one night. And then the lower right would be the national They're a performing arts center basically in Reykjavik. If you walk right outside and turn around behind you and look straight up, that's exactly what you'll see. All right, moving to Africa. This was right before the Faroe Islands. This was a complete disaster getting to. I mentioned before that my original plan was to fly to Chicago and then go to Newark, New Jersey, and fly from Newark, New Jersey, a 15-hour flight to Johannesburg, South Africa. It's the second longest flight in the world. The first longest flight in the world is to Shanghai at 19 hours, but I couldn't get into Newark. Got separated from my bag and had to detour up through Germany and come back down to Botswana. I left Sioux Falls Saturday early morning. The flight leaving Johannesburg, South Africa to Botswana was on Tuesday morning at 9:30. I arrived in Johannesburg, South Africa Tuesday morning at 8:15, about an hour outside of my flight leaving to Botswana. The rest of the group was already there waiting for me. I didn't think I was going to get there. Got separated from my bags. My bag arrived in Botswana a day after I left already, so I didn't have any checked luggage. That entire Patagonia bag didn't have that. For 2.5 weeks in the bush, had to buy all of my clothes in Germany, but made do. Teaches that you really don't need to have a lot of gear. We'll run through a couple of photos really quick. These were all taken with more or less your standard lenses. So either that 28 to 200, like I mentioned, or the 200 to 600. These were all taken roughly 20 to 30 feet away from the animals. The animals don't have any reason to fear you. Botswana is 85% protected land. So the animals just look at you as another mammal. As long as you don't get out of the truck or do anything crazy, you're fine. They look at you and keep moving on. So the center image is a juvenile leopard that we found one morning midway into the trip, walking around with her mom. She came out of the tree and I knew I had my shot. The image on the right is a lioness. Right behind her, Pride had a bunch of cubs and teenagers and everybody right behind her. She's looking into the setting sun there. She's actually yawning, but I tried to bring out the teeth as much as I could and kept it black and white. I want your eye to go to those teeth and really latch onto those. And then I really wanted to bring out the catch light in her eye, as you can see in the center there. So I want your eye to go to the teeth first and then up to that catch light in her eye and hopefully not be distracted by too much else. I kept it black and white because I wanted to simplify the image and it really helped bring out those textures. I'm a big fan of removing color if it doesn't add to the image. You should look at each one of your images and say, does color add or subtract from my image? And make the decision there. Kind of like we talked about with the Faroe Islands, what are we going to be shooting? I knew I was going to be shooting a variety of animals, so I definitely wanted to bring that 200 600 and catch this juvenile female leopard in the morning light with that nice rim lighting. And the variety, we're maybe about 30 to 40 feet away from her. This is the same one from the prior middle shot here, taken maybe 20 minutes apart. The light did change drastically between that time. That being said, I really wanted to bring out the warmth, the glow of the morning sun. Hopefully you can see that there's a big intentional artistic difference between the clear defined lines of the center image here and the more airy atmosphere of its image on the left. Hopefully this image on the left really screams morning to you. That's what I was going for. And then what kind of shooting conditions are you going to be encountering? We knew we were going to be seeing a lot of large mammals. Get some hippos, which are just angry creatures. They're going to be generally pretty slow moving, but if they do a bluff charge like this guy's doing here, going to be fast. So definitely want to get that high speed. Need some fast lenses for that to capture that. Or a giraffe with that high contrast with the setting sun behind him and then his dark patterned skin in front of him. Really challenging conditions there. And then some night sky photography that was totally on a whim. I was not planning on this at all, but because I brought that Sony 12 to 24 2.8 GM, perfect. Line it up, get the shot, we're good to go. So essentially you want to think about what are my required lenses to shoot what I'm going to need to shoot and get those in your bag. Is that going to fill up your bag a lot? Get some of the other gear and then put everything together. There's a couple more shots. This is the last slide before the contact me. The shot on the left here was the first night in Botswana. This is a nice lioness. We were maybe 5 to 10 feet away from her. The sun had gone down. Maybe this was in the blue hour, so maybe 20 to 30 minutes ago. This was shot at ISO 32,000. And I would have no issue blowing this up to 40 by 60. It just shows how far technology has come. And if you are fluent in technology, you know how far you can push it and still get good images. It's a great skill to have, and it's something that you can work on. I think we can all get a little bit better in technology. So really kind of embrace the changes that we're seeing in the scene right now, the tech scene. Topaz is really taken off with noise reduction. We have some stuff in Lightroom, and it's really making it a lot easier to create quality images. The center one was taken midway through the trip. A lion pride had just finished a big hunt to a bunch of warthogs, and its male lion was walking back to get some of the kill from his female lioness, walking right into the setting sun. Hopefully, this image says to you, "Look at my eyes." That's what I was going for. That's psychologically what we're going to hone in on first as humans, especially to a possible predator. We're going to look at the eyes, and with the eyes looking into the setting sun there, you can't beat it. Top right photo was beautiful tree. All the trees are beautiful in Botswana. They really are. I'm not just saying that. And then the lower right image is that same giraffe that we saw in the prior slide here, but in a little different of a scene. So with this one, I was going for the warmth of the setting sun, shot it more of a wide open f-stop. So I actually tried to shoot this initially at like f16 and up to get some of that starburst down there, but it was not working out. So I dropped that down to f8-ish and let a lot more light in and just captured a more pleasing scene to kind of bathe you in that sun. Really diminished all the cool colors. I wanted this image to scream warmth and make you feel like you were there. I want to take you along on the images. All right, last slide. Contact me. I've got a few different social media platforms. You can hit me up on any of them. I'm very active on all of them. Andrew Peschong, AJ Peschong on Facebook, facebook.com/AJ Peschong. Otherwise, my business page is evermor.photography, Instagram at evermor.photography, LinkedIn, just straight up Evermore there. And the website is evermor.online. There's no www or anything like that. Just open up your browser, type in evermor.online, and bam, you're good to go. A couple images on the left, Alaska, top left there, middle. You probably recognize a lot of people in that photo from the Faroe Islands. Skipping that one on the right, going to the lower left, Botswana. That's the rest of the crew that was waiting for me there. Had a great time. And then lower right in Alaska, explored all of Alaska. Was down in Anchorage for about a week, week and a half, and then up in the Denali area for about a week, week and a half, and then up in Fairbanks and about 100 miles north of the Arctic Circle for another week, week and a half. And then I skipped that top right image because that was taken 2 weeks ago. We saved 158 puppies from being euthanized. We have a B Squad dog rescue up here, and we sponsored a rescue mission. And they drove down to Missouri to some of their partners, and then over to Minneapolis and Wisconsin area to pick up a whole bunch of puppies that were literally on the chopping block. Most terrible thing you've ever heard. And were going to be put down. So brought them all back to South Dakota to their waiting foster homes. And it was the cutest thing you've ever seen, heartwarming. So that image there is when all of the dogs came back, loaded them out of that van in the back and gave them to their foster families to be adopted within the next few weeks by families around South Dakota. So really fortunate to be presented with that opportunity. And I'd like to plug any volunteer opportunity you might have. You should follow it, and it really complements your life very well. So that's the last slide from me.
All right, Andrew, you're not done yet. I've got a few questions. You ready? Take a drink.
Perfect. I tried to not make that like forever.
All right, take a drink. All right, here we go. Mika's question is, my fear with equipment carry on is that they'll run out of overhead bins and I'll be forced to check my bag. Any tips to avoid this? Do you pay more to board first?
Yeah, so I want to be as close to my bag as possible, and I look ahead at my flights. I typically I either fly private or when I'm flying, otherwise I usually go like economy or midline. So I look ahead at my boarding group, and like when I was on that really long flight from Johannesburg, South Africa, back to Newark, New Jersey on the way back, I knew that my layover wasn't that long, and I was in a later boarding group to get on that plane. So I was probably gonna have to go fish my bag up from somewhere. So I paid 10 or 20 bucks to get into one of the priority boarding groups and know that my bag is right above me and I can get off the plane. So I would suggest you look ahead and see what kind of layover times you have and when you're going to be boarding the plane. I did have to gate check bags a few times, and that's fine because you can see the bag as they're loading it in there, and it's typically totally fine. I don't have any issues with that anymore because the bags can handle that little bit of slocking, but when time is of the essence, you don't want to be waiting around for your bag.
All right, Darlene's question is, do you use back button focus? I've just gone back to it, and I think it's a great thing with birds in the sky.
Yeah, I've been using button focus purely. I think it's the way to go ever since I got into photography. Yeah, in my opinion, it's the way to go. Focus the scene. You want to be able to focus when you want to focus and compose the scene and shoot. Otherwise, having those decoupled is, in my opinion, how the camera should have been shipped initially.
Um, Another question from Mika. I like it. Have you made any videos that cover your editing process?
Ooh, not yet. I've been learning so much about editing lately and doing a lot of that. I'm about to get into that and some tutorials with that. I can tell you that I dual process all of my images. So I'll give you a quick overview of that. So I'll take an image and, identify your subject and your background. Obviously, you're going to want to sharpen your subject and bring that out and maybe warm it up a little bit. And you're going to treat that completely different from your background, which you're probably going to do a lot of noise reduction, no sharpening, and you're probably going to cool it down too. So I'll process the images in Lightroom separately, make a virtual copy, process one for the foreground image, and then process the other one for the background image, and then take them into into Photoshop and blend them together. The traditional way to blend them together is by using luminosity masks, but Photoshop has really progressed so far where you can easily select the subject or background and smash them together that way. And then from there, I'll luminosity masks are just really wonderful. It's something that you just can't do in Lightroom. You can do some masking in Lightroom, but you definitely cannot do that. It's a wonderful tool. If you have time, you should really learn how to use those because they're going to open up your photography and you're going to allow you to make a lot of finite, like fine-tuned changes and bring out things that you want to bring out while not bringing things out that you don't want to bring out. Need a whiteboard for that. But it really opens up another level. So once I dual process the images, I combine them in Photoshop and then work on them from there.
You're making John Fisher just giddy inside. All right. Sandra wants to know, what is the model of your Pelican case? The carry-on.
So I use the Pelican. All right, everybody ready for this? I'll type in chat 1535 TRVL. I would recommend getting the latest version they have out for that. Elise had the older version. It doesn't have a little handle on top, so it's a little bit more of a pain to do the quick carries when you're getting on and off the plane. I specifically bought that Pelican case, maybe why you're asking, because I knew it was going to meet all of the international travel requirements. I was torn between that and people want to say Think Geek, but it's a think tank photography. Have a lot of their stuff. I was really looking at their rolling bags too, but went with Pelican and I couldn't be happier. There's a reason that Pelican's standard.
Can you repeat the name of the backpack you use?
Mm-hmm. So I highly recommend Atlas, ATLAS packs, and they have two. Get it, a whopping two. Oh, what? You
The
guys
name?
see that?
I
I
did
don't
see
know.
do it either.
I think
That's
Zoom like recognizes that
or that's Atlas is getting so
um
excited that they're getting, being mentioned.
oh
Okay.
I wish they would have paid me for that, but they have two packs. They have the smaller athlete pack. Think of like athlete being more light, kind of like mobile. And then adventure, like, hey, you're going on an adventure. And that's their larger pack. So the adventure is going to be like a traditional backpacking pack. It's kind of a bigger pack. It's going to sit like, on your hips and then kind of be out as tall as your head. Whereas the athlete, a little bit lighter, is going to be a lot more close to a regular backpack.
Okay. Because I'm kind, I believe you have a discount code. Do you have a discount code for Atlas?
Yeah,
Send it to me and
or more. Yeah.
I'll link it. All right. Andrew, that's all the questions I have. Um, this was like a really very comprehensive presentation, and I'm kind of giggly because I like to travel, and there are tricks to the trade, and there are a lot of shortcuts that you can do after you traveled a lot of trips. But it really does kind of, for me, as much as I travel, it's kind of fun for me to listen to other people talk about what they're doing. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, I like the way my system, but sometimes there's a gem in there in my that I never even consider.
Hmm.
And I got to travel with you for just a little bit, so it was pretty seamless, and I really enjoyed that. So, sir, thank you for coming and sharing what you know. And I really appreciate it, Andrew. It's been fun, just hanging out and chatting, even post trip. So I know that at some point you'll be kicking off your workshops. Say it
Yep.
with me.
Big yes.
Yes,
That's
one
the
time.
next thing on my plate.
All right,
Yes,
good.
I will.
And yeah,
I'm going to get it done.
I know you will. So when I start spotting you do that, I might circle back and invite you back to share a little bit more information with us. All right. With that, I'm going to close down your session. Just a reminder, if you want to reach out to Andrew, you can find him on Instagram at evermor.photography, and you can connect with him through his website, evermor.online. And I will link those in the show notes. Next week, John Fisher and Michael Rung will be here to show us some of their post-processing edits in a Lightroom versus Photoshop session called Nature Photography Editing Workflows. Until next time, go out and create something beautiful, and hope that we see you again soon.